We are back with another episode of Spoonie Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Courtney Craig. My guest today is Dr. Eleanor Stein, who's joining us from Calgary, Canada. Dr. Stein is trained in psychiatry and psychotherapy. She also has an appointment in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Calgary, Faculty of Medicine. She teaches a class to first-year medical students on the topic of ME/CFS. She also is the author of the book, Let Your Light Shine Through, Strategies for Living with ME/CFS, Fibromyalgia, and Multiple Chemical Sensitivities. In addition, she offers self-management education online courses, and she's here to talk to us about that today and more. Welcome to the show, Dr. Stein.
Thank you, Courtney. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You're very welcome. Now, you and I have something in common. We both have diagnosis of ME/CFS. So I was really delighted to connect with you to do this interview because of that, but also because we have the shared experience of dedicating our professional lives to teach and help others with the condition. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came to shift your practice in traditional psychiatry to work exclusively with ME/CFS patients and similar conditions?
So I was a second-year psychiatry resident, age 25, when I first became ill. And for me, my illness was a bit of a gradual onset of fatigue. I wasn't one of the majority who had an infectious onset. So it took a year or two of really being less and less able to function. And that was back in 1989. And for those of you who know the history of the disease, you know, the Holmes criteria had just come out in 1988. And at that time, I didn't have all the criteria. So like so many others, when I went to get from one of the very, very few experts at that time in Canada, she diagnosed me with depression. And I was pretty sure I didn't have depression, but I really didn't have any other guidance. And so for the next, I think it was about 7 or 8 years, I just struggled. I didn't have any support. I didn't have any knowledge about how I could make my situation better. I didn't know what was going to happen. So I was in, a really similar situation to many of the patients that I've met since then. When I finished my training, which I was fortunate enough to be able to do, I had a very generous training director who allowed me to work less and take time off as needed, etc. And I finished my program and I was working in psychiatry, which I love. I'm fascinated with how the mind works and the body-mind connection. I actually went to Australia. So I worked for a few years in Canada, and then I decided I could survive working part-time financially, and I went to Australia for a few years. And when I was there, I met Christine Hunter, who some of you may know is an amazing patient advocate who organized these incredible international conferences. And I met all the biomedical researchers of the day. This is back in the late 90s, mostly looking at viral conditions and etiologies. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a real thing. There is information, people know stuff. And so that just really excited me. I had a choice. I could have stayed and worked in Australia, but I would have had to work as a psychiatrist because of immigration issues. And I made the decision at that time to come back to Canada because I knew in Canada I would have more freedom to work in the field of ME/CFS and related conditions. And I could see that there was just a gaping need. Like there was literally, I think at that time I had only met 2 people in Canada. I've met more, of course, since then who were in the field. And for a country of 38 million people, that's not a lot of expertise. So in 2000, I moved back to Canada and I just threw myself into learning and decided to do this full-time. And full-time, which for me is part-time, very part-time, but that's what I've done for the last 21 years.
And being in psychiatry and ME/CFS, those two fields have a lot of tension between them. Did you have that experience among your peers? Did you find it difficult for your colleagues to understand what you're trying to do? Understand the condition, accept that it exists?
I think the conflict between psychiatry and ME/CFS is an unnecessary artifact. And before everybody kind of jumps on me, let me explain what I mean by that. So it is caused by a specific group of British psychiatrists who came up with a hypothesis that was incredibly dismissive and, personally, as someone with the illness, I would say insulting of my lived experience. But in my community of Alberta, I've done a lot of education through the University of Calgary, a lot of continuing education. I've done some talks to the Alberta Psychiatric Association. So that's my immediate psychiatric colleagues. And what I realize is they totally get it, because in psychiatry, we, of all the specialties in medicine, are really used to not having any tests. Like in psychiatry, there's no test to prove whether you're depressed or even if you have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It's all based on clinical diagnosis. So that makes me more comfortable with working with people for whom I don't have a diagnostic test. My psychiatric colleagues, for the most part, really seem to get it and be comfortable with, okay, this isn't a mental health condition, but like mental health conditions, there's no test. We have to take a really careful clinical history and figure out whether the person has the signs and symptoms that are consistent with the diagnosis. So I don't feel a conflict on a daily basis at all.
That's really good to hear. I'm very happy to know that. You've been dealing with the condition now personally for some 20 odd years. Mm-hmm. And how have you managed to manage it, to find treatment strategies to help you have this practice?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's one I reflect on almost continuously. So I became ill in 1989. So that's coming up to 32 years. So really my entire adult life has been severely impacted. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story, but just because I'm doing a lot better now, and I'll tell you what I think may have contributed, though those of you who are listening will know that's always a bit of a guessing game. So for the first, say 7 or 8 years, I just didn't have any information. I couldn't find anything useful. Like I said, I was suffering. I was feeling, I won't say hopeless, but just not knowing what to do and not knowing what the future would bring. And then in 1997, the reason I moved to Calgary is because I met a physician here, Beverly Tompkins, who also has and had the illness and had spent her career already for 4 or 5 years learning, everything that was out there. And so I moved here to work with her. And then shortly after that, I met people at the American Association for Environmental Medicine and the Institute for Functional Medicine. And I just kind of dove right into all of those strategies, which are a little bit outside of conventional medicine, but are trying to improve health and function, even in the absence of, diagnostic markers, let's say. And so in my practice, I delved deep into functional and integrative medicine. I did myself, I haven't done the math, but I'm sure it's somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 on every test you can imagine, traveling to other countries to meet with specialists and all of the comorbidities, trying a bunch of treatments and supplements. As I was doing it and was very committed and kind of my belief system was in sync with that, I noticed that many of those strategies worked for a while. And then I noticed maybe they might work for 3 or 6 months or even a year. And then the effect would kind of wear off and I'd be back where I started. Like 25 years, my course was just ups and downs and ups and downs. I think, I finally got the answer. I'm trying such and such, treatment protocol. And then I would fall off again and kind of go back into despair. So it was very emotionally challenging. Then about 7 years ago, I started hearing more and more about, I'll say, programs which purport, because of course it's not really proven, to help us rewire our brain. So to utilize neuroplasticity consciously and on purpose to moderate our body and our mind's reaction to symptoms. Like nobody's saying these are going to cure or change the underlying biology of these conditions, but it does look like we are able to change our body's habitual reaction to triggers and to symptoms. I went to one of these programs back in 2014, and even before I got there, just reading and kind of going through the, at that time, DVDs that you do before the program, my chemical sensitivity, which I had had my entire life, and I come from a family of people with chemical sensitivity, and I know my genetics around chemical sensitivity are very poor. So, I've got all of the biomedical underpinnings for chemical sensitivity. Those symptoms went away almost entirely and have stayed more or less gone for the last 7 years. So that really made an impact on me, because up until that time, I had been skeptical, possibly even dismissive of these strategies, and I wasn't willing to try them. And it was only when a patient of mine with severe multiple chemical sensitivity took the program and came back to tell me that she had noticed, the first modest improvement that she had had in years. And knowing her for some time, that really made an impression. And it's one of the take-home messages, I think, is that most of what I've learned, like I'm not the one who discovered it, I've learned it from my patients. And then I've continued to do this almost daily practice, not only specific practices, but just how I'm thinking, becoming aware of my thoughts and making efforts to change them on a daily basis. So you would maybe say a mindfulness practice. I've been doing that now for 7 years. And about three and a half years ago, my energy, which had been consistently poor and holding me back from every single activity every day for like 27 years, suddenly shifted. And for the last 3.5 years, my energy has allowed me to do more, enjoy more, go to bed later, not spend so much time resting. It's been a very dramatic shift. I wouldn't say I'm 100% cured. I value my self-management knowledge even more now, because as long as I adhere to it, I can keep on this kind of better level of function. But this experience, as you can imagine, has really impacted not how I think about the biomedical reality of the illnesses. I carefully follow all the exciting science that's going on right now, but it's really made me realize that how we respond and react to our lives and our symptoms on a daily basis can make a significant difference. And it's this lived experience and then observation of how this helps other people as well, so I'm not the only one, that really motivated me to create my online course, which is heavily focused on self-management. So I don't go into a lot of depth into the biomedical underpinnings of the conditions. That is assumed to be true in my course. The focus is on what we can do. Because what I realized when I recovered from MCS is that I still have those horrible SNPs that make it very hard for me to detox. My genes haven't changed, and yet my lived experience has changed. So that lets me know that there can be a little bit of a disconnect between the biology and the lived experience. And that's what I'm hoping I can kind of communicate to people in the online course.
I want to talk a lot more about that last part because there's a lot to dissect there. I just want to back up and say, wow, because what you just described, that whole journey is so similar to my own. Again, for me, I've basically spent my entire adult life as well with this illness, and all of my education and study and all the money that's gone into just understanding it. And that for me was also a pivotal moment, of a real dramatic change when you start to be in tune with your symptoms and actually understand what the condition is and certain aspects of the condition are causing these symptoms, etc. So the more knowledge I had, the more empowered I was to learn more or to be motivated and disciplined enough to make changes, to try different treatments, to have hope that I could improve and get better. So, and I think that's a really interesting experience from someone who goes on to become a physician. And you also find that not many physicians out there that specialize in ME/CFS actually have the condition. So I'm always interested to have that different experience with a clinician who has to deal with this. But also at the same time, patients can't go and get medical degrees to hope to find treatment for themselves. What would you tell a patient then who, with a very lay background, dissecting the complexities of all of this with this backdrop of having extra knowledge of the condition being an empowering thing to recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been running groups, so I call them psychoeducational groups and some psychotherapy groups in my practice here in Calgary for over 20 years. So I have a lot of experience. And what I notice when people come to the groups, there's I'll say the overt learning, like there's the curriculum, right? We're talking about how to become aware of symptoms, understanding what's causing them so that you can use rational self-management approaches. But then there's the covert support, validation. Like some people come to my groups and burst into tears because they've actually never been in a group of people where everybody gets it and where they don't have to explain and justify themselves and why they're maybe not functioning the way they or others think they should be. So part of my motivation to do the online group is exactly, you said some key words, you said empowerment and you said hope. The feedback from people in the group, like I didn't really know the groups I offer online to the world are education, right? Of course, I've never met these people. I can't give any diagnosis or medical advice at all. I would get myself in horrible trouble. So what I'm really providing is education. That's the overt menu. But underneath that, almost everybody has said how nice it is to be in a group, even if you're only communicating by email and chat, of people who just get it. And we're all working together to try to share information that each of us has gathered, because of course, everybody in the group has years of experience of trying things. Even if they're lay people, they know what helped them and what didn't. So I think there's two components to any group experience. One is the actual sharing of information, and the other one is, I think, a transmission of hope and validation. And I just want to say, because I know when I first came out with my self-management online course, some patient partners in the Canadian community were really, I'll say, critical of me. I got some very critical emails. And I think it's because they felt that I was somehow dismissing the biomedical reality of these conditions. And so I just want to say for the record, I have these conditions. I've lived with them for 32 years. I'm very familiar with, the unremitting suffering and the ups and downs and not being able to do so many things that I had planned in my life. So that is a given. The biomedical reality is a given for me. But the reality is we don't yet have biomedical effective interventions or evidence-based biomedical interventions. Therefore, it's even more important for people to learn, okay, I'm not sleeping. What can I do? I think my diet's a bit off. How could I change it? And to learn from, the 20 years of experience and information that I've gathered, not just myself and from the medical literature, but from, probably well over 1,000 patients that I've worked with, I'm kind of curating and putting all that information into hopefully relatively understandable language that the average layperson can take. There's actionable strategies that they can take home and try.
Right. And again, that's similar to my approach when it comes to different nutritional strategies. I'm very aware that one diet is not going to work for every single patient, but there are some things that are true for chronic fatigue syndrome specifically based on the research we do have. And it's constantly trying to find what works for the individual. In your manual I was reading, you describe several different treatment protocols, not just nutritional ones, but supplement protocols that are well known. And it's not that one is going to be the one for everyone. In typical medicine, we have one treatment or one approach to one condition, and that's never really the case with this one. So yeah, lots of trial and error, but also as a clinician, we have to think outside the box with all of our knowledge that we have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's one of the mantras, whenever I'm working with patients is everybody is so different. And just because something worked for me or 10 other people doesn't mean it might actually make you worse. One of the learnings that I've had over, my 30 years of trying so many different things is some of the things didn't work and they just cost me money, which is not, a tragedy. But some of the things, as I look back carefully, actually have made me worse and have caused actually fairly serious symptoms. I'm dealing with some of them right at the moment. I just want to caution people, we always think a biomedical intervention is more powerful, and that is often the case, but it has the power, anything that has the power to help also has the power to harm. I guess the goals of my work with patients as well is just try to help give them a little bit of discernment about what they want to try and be sure that they have informed consent, that they really know the potential pitfalls that could occur.
Exactly. And it's always helpful to work with a trained clinician who's knowledgeable about this, but we are few and far between, unfortunately. Let's talk about neuroplasticity, which you mentioned earlier. Now that's a word we should probably define for our listeners. So can you describe what this term means, neuroplasticity?
Yeah, my favorite definition comes from Dr. Norman Doidge. So being Canadian, of course, I'm a huge fan of his. He's written two very influential books, The Brain That Changes Itself and The Brain's Way of Healing. And I might not get it word for word, but he basically defines neuroplasticity as the brain's ability to change its own structure and function through mental experience over the lifespan. So what this means is we can consciously make decisions about our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors on a moment-to-moment basis that will lead to our brain having a different structure and function. As a psychiatrist, when I was in medical school and I was doing my psychiatry rotation, my very wise preceptor would talk about, is this person with depression functional or organic? Meaning, kind of, is it like hardwired or softwired? And I just never understood that. I was so puzzled. And I've puzzled over that for my entire career. When I really started understanding neuroplasticity, I realized this is the mind-body interface. So as an example, if I have a certain thought right now, say it's a happy thought, I turn on certain genes and I generate certain neurotransmitters and neurochemicals in that moment that are associated with happiness. And because of the first law of neuroplasticity, that what fires together wires together, I also set the stage. It doesn't happen in the moment. It actually happens later when we're in deep sleep. That's when we actually rewire our brain and lay down new memory traces. But I set the stage for a new way of thinking to occur and for my brain to physically change. So for example, just to use a psychiatric example, if I'm suffering from depression, every time I recycle all of the negative things that have happened to me or could happen in the future, I'm turning on all of those neurochemicals and I'm creating synapses or neural connections which are feeding that reality. And it may be true, my life may be dismal, so not saying it's not true, but I have a choice. In every moment, I can focus on what's problematic or troubling, or I can focus on, even if it's a tiny 1% of what's going on in that moment that's good, I can focus on that. If I'm able to do that, I'm going to wire my brain differently. And if I do it repeatedly, or as Dr. Michael Moskowitz, who's written a manual I use for persistent pain, he calls it relentless, meaning throughout the day, every time I become aware of a symptom or a reaction or a thought process that isn't serving me, I have the capacity with focused attention to change it. And if it's like learning anything else, really neuroplasticity is a fancy word for learning. So it's like if I want to play the guitar and I've never played it before, I have to start practicing it. And then I have to pay careful attention every time I make a mistake and figure out what I can do differently. And slowly over time, if you do functional MRIs, the physical appearance and activation patterns of the brain will change. The brain map will change as I learn the guitar. And the parts of my brain that are needed to assist me in becoming more skilled at guitar will physically get bigger, and more resources will be devoted to them, and it's objectively measurable. So when I got that thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, it's not just psychology. We're actually constantly changing the brain structure and function. That was a real light bulb for me, and it's really influenced my practice. And so now I run two groups in my kind of local medical practice, utilizing neuroplasticity or these concepts, teaching people that we have more power than we think. We can change things, even if they're habits that we've developed over decades. You know, I have a woman who's attended the group I do for people with persistent pain using Dr. Moskowitz's manual, Neuroplastic Transformation, in her 70s, who was in a wheelchair, had been in, excruciating pain due to fibromyalgia for decades. And she's now restarted her business as an artist, is walking, has an active social life, constrained, of course, by COVID, is smiling. She had a lifelong history of depression, and she's now mostly not depressed. We all have low days, but she no longer describes herself as having depression. Her life has been totally transformed. This, of course, isn't everybody's experience. Just to say, I feel so hopeful, and that's the kind of, these are the kind of strategies that I'm now embedding in self-management, because when people do ordinary self-management, like, okay, I'm changing my diet, well, that not only changes our nutrition, but it also changes the nutrients that we're providing to the bacteria that live in our bowel, the microbiome, and they provide us with a whole bunch of nutrients that we need and change our biology. So what I'm learning is that these self-management strategies that I always thought we have to do them, but they're kind of boring and maybe not that powerful, I'm now learning that they change our biology. And so we actually have more power than we think.
Now let me play devil's advocate here, I guess, or the cynical ME/CFS patient who would say, I'm not depressed, I'm fatigued, I have a very small energy envelope. What would you say to connect all of these things with the idea that simple self-management strategies can actually impact this kind of biology that we know in ME/CFS?
Yeah, I think, the very compelling science, which is coming out more and more, showing that there's an underlying lack of ATP, let's say. So it may not be that the mitochondria themselves are dysfunctional. It may be that they become dysfunctional because the carbohydrates we eat, we're not able to utilize them and kind of get the pyruvate to the mitochondria. So we'll just say that whole mitochondrial cycle, that evidence is looking quite convincing, and that both in fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, there seems to be very measurable deficits in cellular metabolism. So there's a lack of energy. And I think that has a ripple effect, in so many other areas. So first of all, I want to say self-management absolutely will not cure these conditions. So I've been doing everything I advocate I'm not 100%. I've got stuff going on. I'm still kind of so-called working my program on a daily basis. And I think if I fell off the self-management wagon, I could be, back in a position of being much more severely impacted. And I also talk about in my manual and in my course, for people that are severely ill, these strategies are just not available or barely available. Like when you have so little energy that opening your eyes is a trauma, it could be insulting for me to be implying that self-management is going to change that, right? I think rest is your definite best strategy. So we're all different. The degree to which these strategies will help varies drastically. But what I would say is it doesn't hurt most people. I would say as apart from the severely ill who just literally don't have the energy to spare to learn or try any self-management strategy. For most people, even if you can shift one or two of your symptoms a little bit, we talk in my groups like 10% doesn't look like a lot, but I'll take it. 10% better than maybe where I was before. Things like dysbiosis, of course, can be significantly changed with diet. I think we don't understand enough about the cause of the immune dysfunction and the neuroinflammation. So could it be that if we paced, so for people that have mitochondrial dysfunction, I have one slide in my presentation which is showing a battery, right, which is green, it has enough energy, yellow, it's kind of in the warning zone, and then red, it's run out of energy. And many people with ME/CFS are in the yellow or the red zone. And so then the self-management strategy of pacing, if I had to say for myself, the single most important thing that I can do on a daily basis, even though I'm doing better, is to pay attention to how much energy I have and then live within that, live within my envelope or my energy bank account. If someone's much more severely affected, their bank account is tiny and the need to live within it becomes even more important. So my best guess about the immune dysfunction, not knowing things never stops me from taking best guesses based on the literature, is that it has something to do with Dr. Naviaux's cell danger response hypothesis. My hope is that self-management, it's like looking after ourselves. So it's like listening deeply to my cells and asking myself, how much energy do I have? Do I have the right kind of food? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I using the little bit of energy I have wisely? My hope is that if we do that carefully and kind of with self-compassion on a daily basis, we may move ourselves through what Dr. Naviaux calls the healing cycle. Then when the body realizes it doesn't have to stay in that cell danger response, hibernation state, maybe with more energy, the immune system will self-correct, let's say. So the other thing I've learned over my 30 years is the interventions I can bring in from medicine, whether conventional or integrative approaches, the only reason they work is because they help the body heal itself. I never thought I would be saying this. I always thought holistic medicine was like, I don't know. I didn't have a strong opinion of it. But I guess with age and experience, I've learned what that means, and that the body's ability to heal from strep throat is what heals us. The antibiotic is a tool that the body is able to utilize. So in the same way, I'm looking for what are some tools that could help us move from the cell danger response in and through the healing cycle to more wellness.
This is a marathon, not a sprint. And I think patients should kind of always remind themselves of that. It can be disheartening to think of it that way, but we don't have a cure, and I'm not cured either. I still have to do things all the time to maintain my level of health. And again, like you said, we're human. We have days when we're down. We have days where we have a flare because we maybe lapse on our self-management. And I think all of us have that experience of pushing our envelopes too far.
Because we're human.
Yes.
That's part of, I think, what it, we always want more.
Right.
More of life.
So,
I was just going to say one more thing, Courtney, that about this, what about the severely ill and these biomedical underlying realities? The other thing, if you read the chronic illness literature, like say people who have lupus and heart disease and diabetes and, even say are recovered from cancer, now considered somewhat of a chronic condition, even though in those fields there are biologic cures that can make significant shifts, right? Like the field of rheumatology has been transformed by monoclonal antibodies over the last 20 years. It's totally different now than when I went to medical school. So of course in ME, that's what we're hoping for. We're hoping for some kind of really transformational tool that will move us way ahead. Nevertheless, if you talk to someone, say who has a rheumatologic condition like lupus, who's taking a biologic, they still do much better if they practice self-management. So I'm not saying that self-management is the be-all and end-all, but it's extremely helpful to live the best possible life on a day-to-day basis, regardless of whether or when we find that transformational tool.
Absolutely right. And I think if you asked every single physician in every country what the number one treatment is for ME/CFS patients, they would say pacing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that we do, and it's effective now, but there's other self-management strategies, of course. And with that, I think I want to segue to ask you to tell us more about your course. What other sort of self-management strategies will patients learn in this course? So your course is online. It's a 10-week course?
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about how a patient might start or how to register?
Sure. So the course structure is a little bit complex. So it's 10 sessions, but the sessions are every other week because most people with ME/CFS, fibromyalgia, and environmental sensitivities have low energy and often lower cognitive capacity than they used to or than they would like. And so I spread it out so that people will have a better chance to access the resources in between the live sessions. So there's 8 online pathways or lessons, and each one of them is on a different topic. And for each one, there's recorded videos that people can watch at their own time in which I'm introducing the topics. The topics are biology of change, so kind of this new understanding I'm learning about of how self-management impacts our biology. And then we have one on diagnosis, helping people become more clear what they actually may have. We talk a whole session on sleep, on energy and pacing, on diet, on managing pain, on environmental exposures, both chemical and electromagnetic frequency, and then on emotions, moods, and stress. So those are kind of the 8 lessons. Before we launch into that, we have kind of a getting acquainted session so I can make sure everybody knows how to use and navigate the website. People can introduce themselves. I get kind of a sense of who's in the group and what their learning needs are. And then at the very end, we have one entire session that's just devoted to Q&A. So everything that maybe people have been wondering but maybe didn't get a chance to ask. There's Q&A in every live session, but often we might run out of time because there's so many questions. And so for each of those subject areas, there are specific strategies. So for example, when one, and they're all rooted in the biology. So again, to go back to the microbiome, if one understands that the bacteria in our bowel metabolize fiber to create butyrate or fat, that gives an obvious intervention that people could do to make their microbiome healthier. And we know that a healthy microbiome has, just immense health effects in physical and even mental health aspects. So that would just be like an example of how understanding the biology informs a self-management intervention.
And it seems like this course is set up a bit differently than other courses I see online. You know, a lot of people are doing online courses now, and a lot of them tend to be kind of boring and dry. You sit and just watch a video of someone talking to you, and it's hard to stay motivated with it. But yours is a very different approach. It's more interactive. It's people have an opportunity to speak directly with you and ask questions, and also you create a sense of community, like we talked about at the beginning, just talking to other people that share your experience. Is that right?
Yes. So there, for each of the lessons, there's about an hour of pre-recorded videos of me explaining whatever the topic is that's being discussed. And then in the live session, which is an hour and 3/4, I kind of review the most important learning points, because I'm aware, again, some people have very limited cognitive and energy resources. So I'm trying to say, okay, if you only take home 2 or 3 things out of this whole lesson, here are the things that I think are the most important. Then we have a breakout. So for 20, 25 minutes, people can chat with each other about the topic. And the emphasis is on the solutions, not on the problem. So it's like, what have you learned? What has worked for you, say in the area of sleep, for example? And then the third part of each live session is Q&A. Depending how many people are there, it's generally they're not asking me verbally. I'm generally looking at the chat and responding to questions in the chat.
People who sign up for the course will also get a copy of your book that's called Let Your Light Shine Through, Strategies for Living with ME/CFS, Fibromyalgia, and Multiple Chemical Sensitivities. And in that book, you have a lot of great tools. I got a sneak peek at the book this week. Very simple tracking strategies and tools to just get that feedback to jumpstart any sort of behavior change or getting into a routine. So you have things like creating a diet diary or tracking your sleep, tracking your pain. So there's lots of great resources to work with your course material.
Yes, and thank you for reminding me that one of my mantras in the course is pay attention, right? So I can give a lot of information, but the really tricky part is for an individual person who knows their own lived experience, which parts of that information are relevant to them. Because I may say a few things that are of no importance to one person or wouldn't be helpful at all, but could be incredibly helpful to someone else. And so the awareness tools, we recommend that as people are going through the online course, they use those charting and awareness tools that are in the manual, and there's others on the online course as well, to really pay attention. Say my sleep is poor. What exactly is the problem? Do I have problems falling asleep, problems waking up? Am I being woken because of pain, because of my dog, because of temperature, because I'm having night sweats, because of my, inflammatory illness? Or there's so many potential reasons why a person could have unrefreshing sleep. And without taking the time to really pay attention, a person isn't going to be able to make a good guess at which of the interventions could be the most helpful. So thank you for mentioning that. That's really an integral part of the manual, Let Your Light Shine Through, and also of the course that I think will help people be more successful.
Right, and it's an online course that has homework essentially. So
yes,
that's always good. So I think it's important to mention this isn't your first time offering this course.
I developed the online course actually a year ago. Almost exactly a year ago. I was already working on it before COVID was a thing, but it just so happened the timing was perfect because my first iteration launched in April of 2020. The course lasts, because it's 10 sessions every 2 weeks. The course lasts for 20 weeks. So, you have a period of time, like 5 months, to kind of immerse yourself in the material and the learning and the charting and try to really make a shift in your management. And so actually registration is open right now. My new courses begin on May 11th and June 7th. And I purposely offer I offer them at 2 different times during the day for people that live in different parts of the world. So I have one early in the day that's appropriate more for Eastern North America and Europe. And then I have one later in the day that's better for Western North America and Australia.
That's incredible. You are so kind to factor in all of these considerations, not just the pace of the program for patients that have trouble with cognitive and energy, but also to alter the time zone to accommodate everyone. That's incredibly kind of you. So what is the web address for people to go and sign up?
Yes, so my web address is my name. So it's Eleanor, Eleanor Stein, Stein, MD, as in medical doctor.ca. And then if you look at the very top, there's a link to online education, and you click on that and you'll get to it's called Pathways to Improvement, and it has kind of a logo with swirls. So there's one colored swirl for each pathway. And if you go there, there's a very detailed, probably more information than the average person wants, but I want people to really know what they're getting into. One additional point that's being quite helpful for some people is that after you complete the course, so each time we do a live session, the sessions are recorded and posted, and all of that information, you have access to it indefinitely. So there is a lot of material in the course. I would say that's the most common feedback that I've gotten from people that fill out the evaluations. It's almost entirely positive. The one that's maybe edging on a little bit negative is it can be a lot for some people, especially the more severely ill. And I try to kind of balance that by saying you can go back in your own time. I won't say forever, because eventually, I'll die or it will just become too outdated. But say for several years at least, that information is available and people can go back and review it and use it as often as they wish.
Excellent. So I will post a link to the course and to Dr. Stein's website on my blog and the show notes. And I also encourage everyone, if you're not able to do the course now for some reason, but want to keep it in the back of your mind, do sign up for Dr. Stein's mailing list. And there she also has a tremendous source of educational materials, webinars, and other great information. Thanks for listening to another episode of Spoonie Radio. Be sure to subscribe over on iTunes. And for all show notes, go to drcourtneycraig.com/podcast. Until next time.